Están los Ladrones. And in the opening montage, you heard Ojos Así, and now you're going to hear Ciega Sordomuda. What are the stats?
Well pronounced, Josh.
Your Spanish could use some work there, Josh. We'll
Donde Están los Ladrones by Shakira comes in at number 825 in the 1990s on Best Ever Albums, number 87 in 1998, number 4,891 of all time. It is Shakira's highest-rated album on Best Ever Albums. It's one of two albums tonight that made Rolling Stone's list, just barely, coming in at number 496 on Rolling Stone's list, and Shakira ranked number 1,541 of overall artists on Best Ever Albums.
Yeah, I saw in the stat that said it's one of the only Spanish language albums on the Rolling Stone list, like all Spanish.
Oh, yeah.
So that's
very well
note
could
as
be.
well.
Yep. There's not many of them. Yeah.
This album came out September 29th, 1998. Shakira was born Shakira Isabel Mubarak Ripoll in 1977 in Barranquilla, Colombia. This is our first time covering her. This is her fourth studio album out of 12 so far. Her most recent was in 2024. Genres: Latin pop, reggaeton, rock en español, which came up over and over again, so I guess that's the subgenre. Some influences. While she has a lot of kind of multicultural influences, as you probably heard in this album and other songs that she's done, but she herself has cited rock music early on in her teenage years, like Led Zeppelin, Beatles, Nirvana, Metallica, but also like Sheryl Crow, Madonna, Alanis Morissette she also got compared to early on.
I hear that.
Similar artists: Karol G, J Balvin, those are Colombian artists. Rihanna, Taylor Swift, and Selena Gomez also have cited her as an influence, so I kind of threw them in there, even though they're not necessarily like Shakira. Pretty much any Latin pop artist was probably influenced by her some way or another, especially those from South America. She is a massive artist, and she had a lot of bio. She's one of the kind of best-selling artists worldwide of all time, and best-selling female artists worldwide of all time. Hips Don't Lie is her only number one on the Hot 100, and her 2014 self-titled album reached 2 on the Billboard 200, but it also reached number 1 on the top Latin albums and Latin pop album charts. She's of Spanish and Lebanese descent. She's influenced by a variety of world music and genres. You can hear Middle Eastern influence in some of her songs. She helped popularize Latin music internationally, which helps her popularity and sales. The album's name was inspired by an incident at the airport where a suitcase containing all her written lyrics was stolen. She never got that back, and she had to she couldn't remember all the lyrics, so she had to kind of start over. Over 7 million copies of this album have been sold. Her 1999 MTV Unplugged performance was another album along with this that kind of really raised her profile in the U.S., especially among the Latin audience in America. And the MTV Unplugged performance was the first time that MTV did a Spanish language broadcast of that. As I said, this album is her breakthrough into the U.S. Latin market. She also debuted on the Rosie O'Donnell show in 99 and performed Inevitable off of this album, and then she went on tour in North and South America in 2000. This album was produced by Emilio Estefan, husband to Gloria, and he was the most important Hispanic producer at that time. This album was recorded in Miami, and at this point, this is the tipping point where she then started working on an English crossover album, in English, which ended up being Laundry Service. Her next album was released in 2001, and that had the song Whenever, Wherever single on it. That's the first time I remember hearing her with that song. And then some other random facts: she created the 2010 FIFA World Cup song, Waka Waka, This Time for Africa, if you remember that. She's founded the Barefoot Foundation 97, which builds and maintains schools for underprivileged kids in Colombia. There's a 21-foot bronze statue in her hometown. And there's a whole separate Wikipedia article on the cultural impact of Shakira. It's like the most extensive thing I've ever seen about an artist that we've talked about in terms of cultural impact. So that's testament to her popularity, I think. And she's also cited as one of the most influential women in the history of music, which is a pretty big claim. So I only know Shakira from like her English language stuff. So this is the first time hearing her all in Spanish. What did you guys think of Donde Están los Ladrones? Let's start with Matt in his fluent Spanish, apparently.
That ain't happening. I my first reaction to this record was one of surprise, especially since how much rock this is. There's a lot of this is mostly a rock album, right?
Yep.
And I can't say that I'm terribly familiar with even Shakira's a lot of her hits, but I don't recall hearing anything that sounded quite like this in her hits. Yeah. So it's clearly, like I said, a surprise. I was kind of expecting more of like a pop-oriented, dance-oriented album. Now, but plenty of this is still pop and dance. It's just there's a lot of distorted electric guitars on here. Yep. So I was surprised by that. I generally liked it. I thought a lot of this is pretty melodic. It's pretty catchy. I think that there's some good variety on here too. There's some ballads that are really pretty that she's doing. And there's a song like the last song, like Oyos Asi, which is like kind of like this, I don't know, it's like they're throwing in some Middle Eastern vibes into it as well. So you're getting some variety here, but there's definitely like there's almost like an arena rock kind of bombastic feel to this. These are songs that are kind of mostly, for the most part, meant to be played in like a big arena in front of a large crowd. And generally speaking, I'm here for it. I think it's very catchy. It's very upbeat. I think I liked it. Again, it's kind of similar to what we were talking about with the one of the singles that we covered before. How much like I liked it more in the beginning than I did later on, and it's not because. I think it's just because I was so surprised. I was like, geez, I wasn't expecting it to be like this. But I also feel like there were some elements to it that didn't quite keep me engaged as much as maybe I can't really put my finger on it, but maybe as some other records did. But I listened to this about 3 times, and I still liked it the third time around. I don't remember liking it as much as I did that first time, and maybe that's just because of being surprised. But once I maybe it leveled off and I still enjoyed it, but I don't remember going, oh my God, this is a great album, which is kind of where I was a little bit in the first time I listened to it. So a little bit of a juxtaposition there, but generally speaking, pretty positive. Shakira's voice, going into this album this week, my recollection is that I'm kind of mixed on her voice, particularly because she does that thing it's kind of similar to what Cher does, which is this lower register that she can go into. That is a little bit off-putting. It's not necessarily my favorite female vocal styling. I would say that I didn't hear it as much here, so I was okay with that. She's definitely doing that at times, but it's not as prominent as I feared that it might have been. So I think that was another thing that I was happy about, because that's not, if she did a whole record, and I don't even know if Cher did this the whole time, but it's just sometimes when they do that, it's not my favorite. But generally speaking, it was catchy, it was upbeat, it was fun, and I could see why it's so popular. I kind of want to listen to it a little bit more just to see how it holds up, like maybe does it get better? I don't know, but I definitely was surprised. I think mostly more so than anything. And I think I enjoyed it maybe more than I thought that I would. And I think a big part of that is just because I do like guitars and rock music in general. It's one of my favorites. And the fact that this was incorporated here was kind of, was nice to hear. So I'm thumbs up on it, and a little bit more respect for Shakira, thinking that she's expanding out, and I'm seeing a lot of pictures of her playing guitar, so I'm assuming that she's playing on some of these songs, or incorporating more of her musicianship, not just her voice. But she's also writing these songs and stuff. For the most part, she's pretty much co-writing or writing all of the songs on here, which, and producing too, looks like too. So, pretty talented. It's funny you say that, Josh, about how she's got these really extensive Wikipedia entries or whatever, which is, it's kind of funny how like certain artists really kind of demand that almost. And, you know, but yeah, she's kind of like this worldwide artist that's super popular, that comes from a Latino country, you know, and yeah, she's like kind of carrying the torch for a lot of people, a lot of Spanish speaking people, and Colombians for sure. So yeah, thumbs up. Kind of surprised that I liked it as much and that she went in this direction, but pretty solid. And I'd be down for listening to some more Shakira, I would say.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say went in this direction, because I do process her at times as like a rock artist, because I know there's that side of her. I will say I wasn't as familiar with this album as I was with, I think, the first 3 English ones. I think it was Laundry Service, Oral Fixation, right, was the second, and then I think She-Wolf, right, were they were the 3 that I remember for sure, and I'm definitely familiar with all of those. But yeah, I think I've mentioned a couple times on the podcast, I think it's out there that I am the Shakira partisan on the podcast of the 3 of us, as a musician. And also, you know, she's a charismatic performer, beautiful woman, like part like Latin, part like belly dancer, part world musician. There's even like a whole Americas like element to her. She really does like belong to the world, right, in many different ways, and she's a powerhouse performer. And I think now we know it's not surprising to have like a international Latin artist who's a huge star, right? I mean, Bad Bunny, right, it's been the biggest selling artist in the world the last 2 years, right? So it's kind of almost beyond the idea that that's an unusual thing, right? But at this time, I think it still was a little bit a thing that was emerging. The obvious touch point in the 90s that we can do is Selena, right? Like who we covered before. But hers was really part American, part Mexican, right? And when you listen to that, you can very much see it's rooted in the dual traditions of Mexico and the American Southwest, right? Because, you know, Selena was American, right? Like her roots were Mexican, but she was born in America. Whereas, you know, Shakira is South American, but has roots that go into the Middle East as well, and then very clearly made a jump, right? Like taught herself English, right? And then went into the American artist to the point where, you know, Americans process her as a huge pop star, right? And when I say Americans, I mean, you know, United States of America, Americans, right? I'm respectful of the fact that can mean things to different folks. But yeah, this is a cool album. The Alanis Morissette thing was the first thing I thought of. I said, wow, this is a lot like an Alanis Morissette album. That's not a bad thing, because Jagged Little Pill was great, but you can see elements of how those albums track a little bit. I did take the time to, I'm decent with Spanish. So there was, I mean, certainly like when the titles would come up, right? Like Octavo Dia is an interesting concept. It's like on the 8th day, basically. And the lyrics kind of go along with that, like about a supernatural being, right? Like creating the world. It seemed like the theme though was from space, so that was an interesting dynamic with it. You know, Where is the Thieves kind of tells the story that Josh was going into before. You know, Flies in the House, Moscas en la Casa, those standouts. But I thought the album had quality throughout the entire time. I do like the upbeat stuff a little bit more than I like the ballads, which kind of is how I feel about Shakira in general. Like I feel her best stuff, like, you know, you mentioned Whenever, Wherever, you know, Hips Don't Lie, La Tortura, you know, stuff like that. Those are, you know, all more upbeat songs that have sort of that thing that's her, right? Where it's like you can't quite place where Shakira is from if you don't know. Like, you know, when you learn about her, right, you see it all come together. But if you just listen to her on the radio, you're like, oh, that's interesting. And you even could use the word like exotic, right? Like you can't quite figure out where it's from. And some of it is because her voice, you're right, Matt, she has a little bit of the Cher quality, but she also has a little bit of like a Latin American quality to it as well, like passion, right? Like emotive singing. And it's a little bit like angsty, like grungy, you know, in ways, which makes sense because she grew up listening to grunge music and loved it and references it constantly as music she loves. And that was like the Alanis Morissette comparison to me. But the lyrics were good. And I know she writes and produces all of her own stuff. So she's a woman of many talents. And she's a young woman at this point too. Is she 20 when this comes out, Josh?
Yeah, she was born in 77, so yeah.
Yeah, 2021.
21.
Yeah, somewhere in that neck of the woods. So she's still a very young woman.
And it's her fourth album.
Yeah.
And it's
How
her,
old was
well,
she
she
when-
was. Well, wasn't she like a soap opera star and like a child, like a teen musician kind of? She was almost like how a lot of our pop stars, right? Like started out as like Disney Channel kids, kind of, or.
I didn't see anything about her being on a soap opera. But
I thought so. I thought she was on like a Colombian
right.
soap opera or something like that. And
Her
then
first album was in 91.
yeah.
okay,
so
so she would have been 14.
Wow. Jeez. Wow. And that does not look like.
But when
her
you
from
think
the album
about
cover.
right. But when you think about it, like there's a lot of pop stars that we started with, right, in America, right, that started at 17, 18, right?
She
Like
was
Taylor
signed
Swift
at 13.
wasn't very
She
old.
was signed
Yeah.
at 13.
Well, that's Alanis Morissette's story, if you remember, too. She was a child star, right? Made her first album at like
Right,
12 or 13 years old. So,
Yeah.
I mean, there's even comparisons to that. And, you know, we're going to cover like Natalie Imbruglia, and she was an actress before she was a musician. And, you know, how many Disney Channel kids are we about to cover in a little bit? Like Timberlake and Christina Aguilera and Britney Spears and all them. You know, their first albums dropped around between 17 and 19, right? So, so her story in some ways is familiar. And Selena, how old was she when we talked about her?
Yeah,
She
was
wasn't very
young, too.
old. Yeah, when she was releasing like the stuff as part of her dad's band, right? She was in her mid to late teens. So, but the fact that Shakira is doing all the parts, like writing and producing, is impressive. That's like Taylor Swift, like, right? You know, in terms of, you know, those skills. But yeah, this album's very deep. The rock influences appeal to me. I like the fact that there's Latin beats. I like the fact that they're, especially in the last song, Ojos Así, which, like, eyes so,
That's a cool
like,
song.
I don't quite, like, that's one of those things where, like, my Spanish, right? It's like, I'm sure there's a different way of twisting that, right? But that's a really cool song, and it's a really cool video when you watch it too. I actually saw the preview on Spotify, right? They were showing bits and pieces of like a performance, and I sought out the video, and it was really cool. Like Shakira does an extended period of like belly dancing in it, and which makes sense because the song has clear like I guess what you call Middle Eastern sounds, right?
Yeah,
Would that
I think
be a good way to put it? Yep. And yeah, I connected with this. I actually, Matt, am a little different than you. The more I listened to this album, the more I liked it. And I knew I was going to, because I knew early Shakira, especially her Latin stuff, like had rock influences. And her albums do too, when you listen to them. Maybe not quite as much as this, but there's always a healthy amount of rock in her stuff. Now, the songs that crossed over at the biggest level don't have it as much. They're either world music-y or, in the case of like Hips Don't Lie, a little bit of like hip hop, right?
Yep.
But or electronic even. But there's always a rock element, and yeah, I really enjoyed this one. And the more I listened to it, the more I liked it, and comfortable thumbs up for me.
Yeah, it was a big surprise for me too, in a good way. And like you, John, it got better the more I listened to it. I also really like kind of the rock influence, where I did listen to it side by side with the lyrics in English at one point, so I was kind of like following along back and forth to see, and that's kind of where I saw the Alanis Morissette influence in terms of like what types of songs she was writing and what she was writing about. I agree, the lyrics are pretty good, especially on something like Ciega Sorda Muda, which has this kind of like anti like corruption type of theme to it as well. That comes through in like in the music video, which is pretty interesting. Or Moscas en la Casa, which is kind of like a breakup song. Yeah, there's the rock is all over this. There's a like, it had to be like a Led Zeppelin guitar part on Octavo Dia at the start. It really sounds like that. But even Donde Estan Los Ladrones is straight up kind of rock, and she plays the harmonica too on No Creo, which I thought was a really great song. I almost put that on one of the songs to choose from. But Que Velvas, I also really liked. Like you guys, the upbeat stuff is the stuff I really responded to, and you can see all of the kind of like talent in those songs and how in the future it carries over to, because those songs are very catchy. I found myself going back to those more frequently. Inevitable is also an interesting one with organ in it, and so she's really kind of just like, it is like a Spanish, like the Spanish language
Inevitable
rock.
sounds like a Kelly Clarkson song, doesn't
Yeah.
it?
Yeah, that's a good point. And yeah, I just really enjoyed. I also just, this may sound weird, but I like how she sounds in Spanish and like how the lyrics kind of flow in the songs. There's kind of like a different cadence than like an American delivery of the lyrics. So things are very rapid in Spanish when you're not as familiar with it, or when I was following along. So I enjoyed that as well, and I like her voice. I think she has kind of a very distinct voice, which sets her apart as well. So yeah, this was a pleasant surprise for me. I think it's a pretty great album, and we don't listen to a ton of Spanish language stuff, and so I think it's definitely up there in term. And I haven't listened to a lot of Spanish language in my outside of the podcast either. So that was great to be exposed to that, and something that's kind of like so accessible. It's one of those albums too that you could like. I could find myself like, if I was a kid or something, like learning Spanish because I wanted to know what the lyrics mean or something like that. I feel like it's that kind of influence potential. So it's a thumbs up for me.